Good evening, everyone. This is Komal Tyagi from Team Taxmann, welcoming you all to today's live webinar on GST implications on various compensations and refund time limits thereon. First of all, I wish to start with a brief about Taxmann. We are the leading publisher of tax and corporate laws in India. We maintain the largest and the most accurate online database on income tax, GST, international taxation, company and SEBI law, IBC, FEMA banking and NBFC, competition law, accounts and audit, and Indian acts and rules. Over the years, we have worked strenuously to offer the solutions that will continue to help you grow your practice. Our 6 decades of experience in the domain has helped us to constantly innovate and enhance our services and take the tax practice to a newer height. We have also developed the national website of the Income Tax Department, and we maintain it with the help of our technical team and the editorial. Now I introduce our learned speaker for the evening, Mr. Deepak Suneja, partner NITYA Tax Associates. Mr. Suneja has experience of over 9 years in advising clients on complex indirect tax issues, structuring business models, and planning supply chain in the field of indirect taxes. Deepak's expertise includes law relating to GST, excise duty, service tax, customs duty, and FTP, etc. Welcome, sir. This is our pleasure to have you with us. Now, before we proceed, here are some tips for the participants. You might well be on mute. However, you may post your questions in the chat box available on your right-hand side. Your questions will be answered by the speaker during this session or after the session by the R&D team. A copy of the presentation on the subject matter shall be sent to you in email for your future references as well. Now, without taking much time, I request Mr. Deepak Suneja to address the audience. Over to you, sir. Thank you.
Thank you, Komal. Thank you. Hello, everyone, and good evening. Today, I have an opportunity to discuss 2 very interesting issues, and during our presentation, we'll be discussing the cross linkage between them. But what we'll be discussing is the taxability on liquidated damages or any other damages, compensation, penalty, etc. And secondly, we'll discuss the Supreme Court extension order, which has extended limitation under various laws. So, and at last, we'll discuss how these 2 issues can be linked otherwise. So, we'll start with the taxability of damages, penalty, and compensation. And to start with, let us firstly understand what these words are. Damages, penalty, and compensation. So if you see damages or liquidated damages, is something which the party pays for breaching a contract. Penalty is something which is paid, which is as a punishment of doing something which is against a law or a contract. It is something as a recompose or a payment for a work done. So, and just 1 second. So, if you see the words involved, liquidated damages, penalty, and consideration, there's a stark difference between these words. Liquidated damages and penalty is something which is paid as a something for stopping something to do or as a penalty, or breach of contract or as a punishment. Vis-a-vis, if you see consideration, it is something which is agreed in the contract and paid for services provided. So there's if you with the meanings of these words, we want to highlight that there's a difference between damages, penalty, and consideration. And we'll be discussing the relevance of these meanings in our future slides. Now, let us understand the provisions which are there under the service. Just 1 second. I'll just take 1 second. Oh, sorry. कुछ changes. Sorry everyone for this confusion. So we discussed the meaning. Now going forward, what were the provisions, or I'll say the position under service tax in GST? Till 2012, the positive risk regime under the service tax, there was no category to cover such services. So if you recall, whosoever has done work under the positive risk regime recalls that there were several categories. I recall 107, 110, wherein for each service there was a description, and there were many disputes whether a service would be covered under that description or not. And the department also had a hard time discussing or contemplating whether the coverage would be there under this service or not. So till 2012, these, I'll say, activities, there was no question, because even the department did not have any entry within which they could have covered this. But post 2012, the concept of declared service was introduced. Now, declared service basically, as was defined to include any service and listed in a particular section. And that section had a clause agreeing to do an obligation, refrain from an act, agreeing to the obligation to refrain from an act, to tolerate an act, or to do an act. So I'll just take a couple of seconds for you guys to absorb that in this definition of agreeing to do an act, refrain from an act, or tolerate an act, whether these words of compensation or let us say damages, or in that context any other penalty which is agreed, would it be covered under this clause or not? So in this regard, I'd just like to highlight that as I started, the definition of declared service had a presumption, services as defined under section 66E. So in that context, it can only cover if it is a service in the first place. So we'll cover or discuss the jurisprudence which came in this regard later. Secondly, there was a schedule 2. When GST came, there was a schedule 2 which said the activities enlisted in schedule 2 would be deemed as service and would be treated as supply of goods and services. And the same expression which was there under the declared list was included in this as well, schedule 2 as well. Now, what is interesting and important to note is that the CGST Act was amended in 2018. And the retrospective amendment was to clarify that the reference to Schedule 2 is for classification purpose only. That is, it is only to classify whether a particular product would qualify as a good or a service. It cannot bring into the scope of supply something which is not a supply otherwise. So again, giving you a moment to absorb. This amendment, what it did was, while the expression agreeing to do an act, refrain from an act, etc. was already there in Schedule 2, they said that this expression would not mean that this activity is a supply. You first have to satisfy the test of supplies otherwise, and then state or then say whether if yes it's a supply, then it's a supply of service. But if it is not a supply, then it cannot be taxed only because it is covered under Schedule 2. Now moving forward, and I'll just before I move to the next slide, I'll just like to pose a question and you can probably answer in the chat box. Do you think that this activity of damages, etc., is actually a supply of service, or is it not? And I'll just wait for 15 seconds while you can just chat your thoughts here, whether these activities is a supply of service vis-a-vis the provisions which are there under service tax GST, or it's not a supply. So please guys, I'll just request you that if you can post here. Yeah. Getting answers, just a couple of more seconds. Okay. So many of the participants, so there's Neha, Uday, Viral, Suraj, Kailash, all of them are saying that it's a supply of service because it is, quite frankly, one has even tried to explain that because it is a part of the condition of the contract, it is a supply. But let us now understand what the nature of these transactions are. And I'll start with an example before I proceed to come to my next slide. So again, a question to you, everyone. If let us say you jump a traffic light unknowingly, but mistakenly you jump a traffic light, and at the other side of the traffic light, there's a traffic inspector who gives you a challan. He tolerated the act of you to jump the traffic light. Did the traffic inspector or the government of Delhi or whichever state you are in, did he supply the service of allowing you to jumping the traffic light? Or is it actually in the nature of fine and therefore no supply? I'll request everyone who just answered just to give it a thought. I'll take 13 more seconds here, and I'll just request everyone that if let us say you're jumping a traffic light, there's a challan for that, there's a penalty for it. Is it a service which the government has provided to allow you to jump the traffic light, or is it not a service? So we are getting answers now. Many of us have answered it's no supply, it's nature of fine, etc., or a service. No. So yeah, everyone is now answering that it is not a service. And now let us understand. Let us just go back here and just discuss of what we started with. We started with damages, penalty, and compensation. And let us now compare where I was going through of basis what, in my view, these activities are not supply. While it might be provided in the contract, it is still not a supply. Because firstly, it mixes the basic element of supply or a service, which is, which is that there is no benefit being received by the recipient. So what is a service? So you come to me for getting an opinion. I do that opinion, I charge you. That's a service. This is a service for a consideration. We both agree, parties had a consensus at item and we agreed that this amount would be payable. So there's a benefit which you got, there's a consideration which I got, and both parties in that context were happy. But when it comes to damages, compensation, or let us say penalties, these elements are missing because number one, it's consideration. If you see, while it's in the nature of promises, damages are compensatory in nature. This is the second point, is the most important point which I was referring to. The recipient does not get benefit for damages or compensation. Well, it might be under the act, like fine was under the law, they might be under a contract that I am paying those damages or compensation. But it is never my intent that I want to get as a sufferer, I want to get those damages and compensation. That is never the intent. That is not something which I'm getting as a benefit or for which I entered the contract. Let us say I entered the contract that you have to complete the building in 12 months. I'll any day be happy that the building is completed in 12 months rather than that building getting extended and I getting some damages out of it. I make let us say there's a compensation that you have to supply me X quantity in a month. I never want to get that compensation. It is in that context I'm being forced for particular activities out of my control, and in order to act as a deterrent. Just like for traffic police, why does it impose a fine? It does not impose a fine that okay, you break a traffic light and you pay me fine. It is to make it a deterrent that this activity should be avoided and should not be repeated, and therefore there's a financial implication attached to it. Same are the cases with these were damages and compensation. So the first very important point is that the damages or compensation or penalty, they lack the basic characteristic of being the supply. The term itself means that they are being paid without the will, or let us say without the acceptance of the taxpayer. I'm saying in generic cases. Of course, there may be a case that, okay, I had an option, I decided to get some money and willingly tried to do something. So in one of the advices, there was a point that yes, if let us say that is being done willingly, these same terms or the terminology might still be a consideration. But in cases wherein they are present in the contract as a deterrent, therein there is no element of service which is there. And another, I'll say, important or interesting point is that they also don't form consideration in those cases. Because if you see, there are two terminologies which are there under different laws. One is consideration and other is compensation. If you, it's not that these terms have not been defined or let us say discussed under the erstwhile judgments or laws. There have been sufficient jurisprudence in this regard, wherein they have distinguished that, let us say, a compensation cannot be termed as a consideration, and let us say penal clauses in the agreements to protect the commercial interest is actually compensation, not a consideration. So there is no will of the parties in that context that they want to get a compensation. The primary intent of the parties is not to get those, but as a safeguard measure, they agree that okay, we'll be getting these points. Lastly, what the courts, or let us say a generic logical distinction which is there is, consideration is a result of active action, while damages represent passive action. So consideration I do to get the work done. Damages usually are, okay, I could not do something, there was a loss to you, and therefore damages are there. And if you see the contract laws, etc., sometimes damages are challenged to prove that, yes, there was an actual loss, and in several cases, the courts are able to prove. So, moving here, that if you see the activity of if we see whether this is the supply or not, basis two reasons. Number one, because of the basic element or absence of supply in this. Secondly, because there is no consideration, it's in the nature of compensation, and therefore there should be no GST applicability on this. So we'll now have two more parts to go here. Firstly, I'll be discussing the jurisprudence which has come on the issue, and then I'll be discussing a suggestion or a way forward that what should be. And because if you see in this thing only, many of us, when I asked you it's a supply, they were yes, and therefore when we compared it to find there was no. So what to do in this confusion? Because this confusion is not something which is unique to you. Many, I'll say, taxpayers across, and for that matter, even the department authorities across have been facing with this confusion. So I'll just first start with the jurisprudence and then we'll go to the next step. So under service tax, first I'll start. And this is a unique or an important issue that if you see on these lines, almost all judgments under service tax are positive, tribunal and above. So basically, notice pay, there was a High Court judgment, there was a sested judgment that no, notice pay is not a supply and therefore no service tax is payable. In elementary, there was a cancellation of advance money, cancellation fee. So I'll say it's in that context akin to damages, penalty, compensation, etc. For which again the sested had no GST to be payable on that. Under Southeastern Coalfield, the compensation was paid for cancellation of a contract. They said no service tax on this because it is not a service. Then you have cane food and industries wherein because of getting lesser work allotted, they paid GST. Again, in this case, they said this is not a supply of service and therefore no GST to be paid on this. I'll just take a moment on this, and what all these screen highlights is the courts are thinking in one direction. They're acknowledging the fact or distincting between that if, let us say, there's something which is as a deterrent, it's not a supply of service, it's not a consideration. All these cases are after 2012. So I'm not talking about cases wherein before 2012, because before 2012, even department did not contain this. And it took some time for the courts, so these jurisprudence are recent, I'll say comparatively recent. But all these have been going in one direction only, that, okay, if there's a damage, if there's a penalty, if there's a compensation, no service tax should be levied by saying it's a toleration of an act which has been done. Because it misses the basic element of service, or because it's a consumption-based tax, it misses the basic element of consumption there. Moving forward to GST. GST, as you all must be aware, the areas usually are pro-revenue. So unfortunately, again, there has been a big gap vis-a-vis the service tax jurisprudence and the GST jurisprudence. So the Bombay High Court in this case held that no GST would be leviable, but I'll not say that this is the valid precedent under GST, because in this case the facts were very specific. I'll say the court clerk was being asked, the question of GST leviability was on court clerk. And in this case, amicus curiae was appointed, and he, for several reasons, said that GST is not payable. Vis-a-vis these I'll say specific points were not discussed in detail. So while this is a positive judgment, I'll not say it's a precedence under GST. The advance ruling for notice pay, yes, under GST also they have started coming favorable, thankfully. But vis-a-vis all other points, like let's say liquidated damages, or let us say damages, or even compensation, there are many advance rulings which consistently have held, be it double AR, be it triple AR, which have held that liquidated damages or penalties or compensation, if they are arising out of contract, they are leviable to GST. So as you guys all started, and I also mentioned that this is nothing which the confusion is unique to you. Across only this confusion is there, and the authorities are also saying that this is leviable to GST. Now, before I move forward, a valid question which would be there in your minds is, so what to do? I told you this is under service tax, there is a jurisprudence favorable in that regard. I told you under GST, there is some negative jurisprudence, some positive jurisprudence. So what should be the way forward in that context? So in this regard, I'd like to highlight that if, let us say, because this issue, of course, would be disputable and is expected to be settled after quite a significant period of time. So in that context, if, let us say, the recipient is eligible to credit, or you are entitled to recover this amount from the recipient, in addition to your consideration, I'll say you should take a commercial call to charge GST on this amount. However, we have seen several cases, say in contracts with the government, or let us say where the customer is a B2C customer, and all these are inclusive of GST. So one very common example that I see across is cancellation of advances. So an advance is received specifically for goods. So you receive an advance, you write off that GST, or let us say vis-a-vis the advance is being written off after 3 years after the limitation period. So there are many cases wherein the GST, if payable, would become a cost to you. In those cases, I'll suggest that the law, vis-a-vis the arguments which we discussed today, and the judgments under service tax clearly indicate. And in that context, there's no much doubt that no GST is payable on that. So in that context, if the amounts are significant, yes, you should definitely take a call. Lastly, it also sometimes so happens that the transaction actually is made in foreign currency, wherein again an argument of export can be taken. So commercially, if let us say the revenue implications or the commercial implications are not there, you may decide to err in favor of department. However, where the amount is becoming a cost to your pocket, you may as well consider to litigate this amount. And in our view, basis the jurisprudence which is there under service tax, this is a very good case to argue, and you should definitely argue that. Now I'll move to the implications of Supreme Court extension order. So, and during the end of this presentation, I'll also link what we discussed in this, the conclusion of that legally GST is not payable, commercially you may take a call. I'll be linking it in the end of this slide for Supreme Court extension also. So the implications, so firstly, understanding how the timelines moved regarding Supreme Court extension. Just to first of all give you a background, in this, that Supreme Court, when COVID came, it took into acknowledgement that the life as usual came to a standstill. So it said, okay, under tax laws, be it GST, excise service tax, or under other laws also, there's a time limit which is prescribed. So Supreme Court took cognizance. In March 23, it issued an order as COVID cases were rising, that from March 15, 2020, if any due date is falling, that shall be extended. So please pardon my language. I'll be using the exact legal terms what Supreme Court said in the next slide. But this is just to give you an idea how things move. So on 23rd March, you got the first order. They said 15th March is the cutoff date. The cases have started rising. Life is not usual, so it has extended. Slowly and steadily, when the life came to standstill after 1 year, almost after 1 year. So March 8, they said, okay, life is normal now. So they defined or prescribed a period that this period shall be excluded. Moving forward, 2021, March, April, May were very unfortunate. The second wave hit India hard. So on 27th April, after several representations, they said again that the original order, that is on March 23rd, that is restored, and therefore the timelines are again extended. On May 28 and on July 20, certain press releases were issued. We'll discuss them in detail in subsequent slides, which upheld or which, let us say, gave emphasis to the Supreme Court order. And finally, putting an end to this extension after this entire second wave, even after third wave on Jan 10, they said, now things are coming back to normal. So period from 15th March 2020 to Feb 28, 2022 shall be excluded. So these are, I'll say, the timelines of various orders which have come. Now we'll be moving forward to what exactly did Supreme Court said in the relaxation. So firstly, right from the first order till the last order, they said that what they were covering firstly. What is the, I'll say, what is the scope or what is the coverage of the Supreme Court order? It said limitation prescribed under general or special laws for a judicial or quasi-judicial matter shall be extended. Taking just a minute here, general and special laws. So special laws is any law which prescribes specifically a limitation period. Just once. Yes. So in this case, if you see special laws like GST has a limitation period of 2 years for refund. It has a limitation period of 5 years or 3 years for issuing order or show cause notice, etc. So these are special limitation periods which have been prescribed. And if you talk about the general limitation period, that is your general limitation period of 3 years as has been prescribed under the General Process Act. So this is what is covered by the limitation period under the general special laws. Second, what are judicial or quasi-judicial matters? Judicial, of course, what we know are the matters which go before the courts. But if you see, in addition to those, by statute, several authorities have also been given a quasi-judicial authority. So when a department issues you a show cause notice and asks you to explain the reasons, he's acting in a quasi-judicial authority, which means that while he's not a judge, he is supposed to act in the capacity, or I'll say following the parameters of logic of how a judicial matter is to be conducted. So these are quasi-judicial matters. So issuance of show cause notice, commissioner appeal, these are quasi-judicial authorities which are there. So not per se judicial, but acting in the authority or in the capacity in judicial matters considered as quasi-judicial matters. So what would be to what matters would it apply? So the order of 2020 stated that it would apply to all petitions, applications, suit, appeals, any other proceedings would be covered under this, I'll say, ambit of Supreme Court orders. So if you see, it had a very, very wide coverage. All other proceedings did make it quite wide. Now, vis-a-vis all the orders, considering the last order in totality, the time period from 15th March 2020 till 28th March 2022 was excluded. They also said that let us say after this expiry, if the balance period is less than 90 days. So after, let us say on 15th March, if the limitation left was 1 day, from 1st March 2022, 90 days at least would be allowed. Because if they presume that on 15th March 2020, March 1, 2022, situation is getting normal. Since situation is getting normal, we guarantee 90 days to do all the pending work which is there. And they also acknowledge that if, let us say, a higher period of limitation is there, so if, let us say, on 15th March, you had higher days, more than 90, 95, 100, whatever days, you'll be granted a higher period. We'll be discussing this in minuteness with an example in the later slides. But yes, just to give you an idea of what the Supreme Court said. Now, this Supreme Court order in itself brought several questions. What do you mean by quasi-judicial matters? What all would be covered, what all not would be covered, etc. So one of the relevant question was that this specific extensions under GST, or for that matter, income tax, under customs, etc., whether those would be relevant or the Supreme Court order would be relevant. Because the authority, Article 142, under which this order was issued of the Constitution, whether it can override the specific provision, etc., all these points are under consideration. So in that, firstly, explaining what specific extensions were given. First extension was given under GST for the period March 20 to June 29 till 30th June. In this except for tax payment, registration, e-way bill, ITC matching, etc., almost all the compliances which were falling between these two dates were extended. So if you see, the dates are very limited. From March 20th, not even 15th, March 20th till June 29th. This specific period was excluded. Under excise, the period was a bit larger, from March 20th till December 30th, but this one extension was given under excise. Under GST, a second extension was also given for the second wave. That was from 15th April till June 29th. But yes, again, if you see in this entire thing, the Supreme Court extension was much, much wider, and it had covered a much larger period than the GST, which covered a very small period. So a logical question is, okay, so if let us say under GST, I have to file LUT, or let us say I have to make export within the next number of days, can I apply the Supreme Court order? Let us say I was to file a refund, can I apply the Supreme Court order? I was to, let us say there's a delayed payment of tax, can I apply a Supreme Court order? All these questions were posed and started coming in the mind of the assessees. So circulars which were issued in this regard, so CBDT, CBIC, they took acknowledgement of the confusion which is prevailing, and they issued a couple of circulars. Firstly, the CBDT said that vis-a-vis filing of appeal, which is in that context, as I explained, is a quasi-judicial matter, they said whatever is more beneficial would apply. So they took cognizance of the of the Supreme Court order. They said it would definitely apply for the issue of filing appeal before Supreme Court, which again, as I discussed, would fall under the quasi-judicial matters authority. CBIC, however, bifurcated the cases into different baskets. So CBDT circular was only on appeal. CBIC circular actually said that the appellate authorities, yes, it would get covered under this order. But when it comes to original jurisdiction, that is like issuance of show cause notice, it would not get covered under the Supreme Court order. Similarly, they said that no extension is applicable for any proceedings to be initiated by the taxpayer. So I was discussing, let us say, any action, or let us say export dates, etc., payment of tax, even refund applications, those would not be covered. Also, they clarified that any other timeline under GST is not extended. So those would get covered by the respective extensions which are given by CBIC and CBDT. Session in an internal circular clarified, again a quasi-judicial authority, so this clarified the condonation application should not be filed, and all the cases covered by Supreme Court order, the extension would automatically apply. So here just pointing out or just highlighting what I wanted to say. If you come back to this, I'll say firstly the Supreme Court order. They said all the quasi-judicial matters, all the petitions, applications, suit, etc. affected, they never extended any specific things in that regard, be it return, filing, payment of tax, etc. Those, if any, were extended by GST twice for a limited period. And then the circular also clarified to this aspect. However, 2 points of circulars are in this context relevant, which I'd just like to bring your attention to. One point is when it says that it does not apply to original jurisdiction, that is issuance of show cause notice. Second is when it said that any extension on proceedings initiated by taxpayer, it would not apply. So if we saw the quasi-judicial authorities when it said any proceeding, that is very wide. It should apply to issuance of show cause notice. And then second points come to the applicability on the refund. And for that, before I share my view, I'll also share the jurisprudence on this. So the courts, be it Allahabad High Court, Bombay High Court, Madras High Court, has consistently been saying that a refund application, because if you see you file an application that gets judicially decided, there's a show cause notice which is issued and not a which is passed, so that gets covered by the Supreme Court order. Consistently, the courts have been holding this. So if you see in this slide, the CBIC circular says that any proceedings to be initiated by taxpayer would not be covered, the courts have been holding otherwise. They have been saying this is a judicial proceeding or this is a proceeding. Any application was covered and therein any other proceeding that gets covered. So they have been granting extension for refund. And we agree with these courts. The courts have rightly, because when COVID came, COVID made the life standstill. It was not that you can file a reply before a court or to a show cause notice or an appeal, but you cannot file that, but you can file a refund application. If let us say the life was not usual, it was even not usual for filing a refund application. And in that context, the consistency of the courts show that they are in that context clear that this extension would be applicable. So going forward, I'll just like to understand or explain with help of an example what this means. This extension of, or let us say the Supreme Court order being applicable, what does it mean? So let me take an example that a taxpayer paid excess tax in Feb 2018. He was supposed to file refund in 2 years from date of payment of tax, which comes out to March 20th, 2020. If you see this March 20th falls after the Supreme Court order of 15th March 2020, and therefore the period between March 15 till Feb 28 shall be excluded. So this period shall excluded and his due date automatically jumps from 20th March to 20th Feb 2022. And now he has 90 days from March 1, 2022 to file the refund application. In essence, any refund which the due date of which was from, let us say from after March 15, 2018 or any after, can be filed in May 30th, which is 90 days from 31st March 2022. This is the minimum. It may also be possible that on 15th March a higher period of limitation was in balance, therefore that gets extended. But at least this much would get the taxpayer would get an option to file a refund of this. Now moving forward, and as I promised you, linking with the first case with this case now. So let us say some of you have some cases wherein with the understanding that tax is payable on, let us say, forfeiture of advance, or let us say liquidated damages, penalty, compensation, etc. You have paid GST. The GST, the period for which you have paid GST is Feb 2018, and after that, any time till date. You have not passed on the burden of GST to the customer. So basically, I am laying down the conditions of filing a refund of excess payment of tax. In short, if you have paid GST on forfeiture of advance or cancellation or liquidated damages, etc., which we discussed in the first part of the session that no GST is payable on that. And you paid GST anytime after Feb 2018, because Feb 2018, the due date was, the tax would have been paid on 20th March 2018. So the 2 years, etc., fall accordingly. You can actually file a refund claim with the department on this basis. This is the Supreme Court extension. And therefore, any excess tax paid right from 2018, almost 4 years now, can be filed in 30th May. So in that context, this is an apt time for you, if any excess tax has been paid, to apply the refund for the same. Be it on account of, let us say on these accounts, damages, etc., or for any other reason. If any incorrect tax, excess tax has been paid, the refund of the same can be filed. Just the last point which I like to make, and then I like to take questions that have come. So the relevant, so as I mentioned that if let us say for March 20th, we discussed that if it falls in March 19, only 4 days have passed. So on 15th March 2020, only 4 days were pending till refund would have been filed. So now the last date would be 90 days would be given instead of 4 days. On 15th March 2020, 4 days were pending. So now he'll be getting 90 days. But if let us say the excess tax was paid in 2019 and on 15th March 2020, 400 days were pending. In this case, those 400 days would start from March 1, 2020. They are meant to file the refund. And if let us say on 15th March 2020, higher period of 400 days was available, that would be the period where the refund can be filed. So this is it from our side. I'll just look at the question and answer round. I'll just get back if let us say any questions are there. Just one second. So there's just one question on SLVDR, whether that would get extended that was extended till 30th/6/2020, whether that would also get extended. So in that context, Neha, that was not a judicial proceeding. While I'll cross-check and I'll inform the Taxmann team what our final views are, but in my prima facie view, that was not a proceeding in which the action was to be taken, or neither an application, or let us say neither a judicial application was to be conducted. But yes, I think a fair point and basis what the courts have been saying for refund, a view may be taken. But what I'll do is, I'll quite frankly, I've not researched on this, so I'll prefer that I research on the issue and then I get back up for this. So any other questions? I think we can wait for a minute, and then if any other questions come, we'll answer that. One question has come from Viral that we are being commissioned to tolerate an act outside India where the GST is payable. So in this case, Viral, if let us say firstly, if you're paying commission to a party outside India basis the place of supply, no GST is payable under RCM. However, if let us say it's a toleration of an act, well, these actually are two different things. They cannot be same. It would either be a commission or an amount towards toleration of an act. But if let us say it's in commission in the nature of intermediary, otherwise also the supply would be outside India and therefore no tax would be payable. Or if it is a toleration of an act, then also that you can be taken if it is becoming a cost to you. But what I'll request is, if you can just write a query in detail or clearly to us, we'll probably give you an answer. Our mail ID is also given here. Next question. So Prerna, your question is that let us say money was given to purchase land, and then thereafter that land could not be purchased and the money was forfeited. Whether GST or tax is payable on that? So no, it is not. It does not get, because what is there is forfeiture of an advance in that context. So forfeiture of an advance does not qualify to be a service, and as we discussed during the session, there is a judgment for that also. So no, forfeiture of an advance or cancellation of an advance is not a supply of service in our view. So I think this is his, Komal, if you can just close the session.
Well, thank you, Mr. Suneja, for this insightful presentation. This would definitely add to the knowledge on the topic. I appreciate the subject matter and thank you for precisely explaining it to the audience. I also thank all the participants for being so cooperative. Thank you all for taking time out of your busy schedule and joining us in this session. Though we have tried to reply to the queries raised during this session, yet in case you have further questions, you may please send them to us in writing at sales@taxmann.com. And yes, we shall share the copy of the presentation used in this session in email to all the participants. Thank you all once again. We shall soon be back with another vital topic. Till then, stay safe and have a great time. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Thank you.